In this video, let's carry on blending surfaces. So following the same procedure, we want to create a sketch on the side of our steering wheel base. We're going to hide the surface that's obstructing our view and create a spline using start and end point. In this case, I actually want to snap the spline to the end edge of our steering wheel base and induce a little bit of curvature. Then we can use this to create a helper surface from our Surfaces tab, going towards the center of the part. Next, we want to turn on our surface split line again. And we can create a boundary surface going in our direction 1 from the end of our extruded surface, that's our helper surface, to one of our split lines in the center. Again, we're going to drag the endpoints, making them roughly equal in width. We want to look at this from the front view and apply some relations. We're going to have tangency to face with our extruded helper. We're going to have curvature to face with our split line. We want to reverse the direction. Then we're going to tweak the handles until we get roughly the correct shape we're looking for. I think that works out pretty well. So let's hit OK and take a look at what we've created. So now we've created two boundary surfaces for the upper and lower portions of our steering wheel blend. These are going to be used to help create the filled surfaces to blend everything together. The next thing we need to do is actually create a similar surface, blending from our turn signal area into this upper portion. Now, one thing that might be easy for us to do is hide this reference image and use our delete face option to get rid of some of the surfaces inside of that split line. Because we're going to be creating these surfaces based on our geometry, we don't really need to have that surface area filled in there. So now what we want to do is create another boundary surface going from the edge of our turn signal area to this upper edge here. Now looking at this from the front, we're going to reduce the amount that we're actually creating here because we're not trying to create the entire surface. We're trying to create a small portion of the surface to help drive our shape. With this upper edge, we're going to use a curvature to face relation. With this lower edge, we're actually going to use a tangency option, but we're going to actually change it to a 10-degree off of tangency. Because we know there's not a smooth tangent relation with this area, it's actually producing a downward slope. That's why we want to add that 10 degrees. Let's OK this and take a look at what we've created. So again, we're using these surfaces for our final product, but we're also using them to help drive the shape. If we were to try to fill in all this area with one surface, it would not work very well. We would have a way too difficult of time trying to create that geometry. One thing we need to look at here is the geometry we created with our helper surface and the fact that it creates an intersection point between these two, even though there's a gap in space with this vertical distance. So before we actually fill in the area between here, we're actually going to trim back some of this area. So let's create a sketch on the front plane. And let's go from our area here, create a spline, and comes back here in space. We want to make sure that the spline has tangency with this section here, but that we trim back a small portion of it in the corner. So we're going to use that sketch to trim our surface and remove this small section here. Now this will allow us to carry on making a few more surfaces. We're going to follow the same procedure again. We're going to use boundary surface. We're going to go from this lower edge to this upper edge. And again, we're going to drag these endpoints around because we're not trying to create the entire surface. For the lower edge, we're going to use curvature to face. For the upper edge, we'll use tangency. And with that tangency, you want to make sure that if you want to carry on that 10 degree, that you apply it here as well. Now for the actual steering wheel, I think we're going to use a tangency on this back edge and let it slowly blend into a 10 degrees on this edge. So let's OK that and take a look at the results. Now you can see how the light hits this. We have a very sharp corner at the top edge and it kind of blends in towards the lower edge. So let's go back into our boundary surface and take a look at how we can modify that. For this upper edge, we can increase the weight of its handle, for instance, making it 2, and you can follow the zebra lines and look at the curvature that's created. For the equal curvature relation, we can increase this or decrease this and have a drastic effect on the curvature that's being created. So you can see there, we're actually kinking the surface quite a bit. If we reduce this to 0.5, we get a much more gradual bend. So let's take a look at what we have here. We have to be very careful with our results because we need to get as close to the images as possible, but obviously we have very little detail in the area that we're dealing with. So it's important to allow the surfaces to blend together how they want, and we can tweak the original surfaces to help that. For instance, this boundary surface was created by the use of a helper surface. If we go back into the helper surface sketch, we can decrease the curvature we created here, and that has a drastic effect on the boundary surface created at this point, and then ultimately has a drastic effect on the boundary surface where we blend back into our turn signal area. So if we go back into our last boundary surface created, we can tweak these numbers one more time. So use 1.5 for the upper edge. For the lower edge where we have equal curvature, I'm going to use 1. So you can see this gives a much better result. The blend is a lot smoother, and we have good result all the way around. We're going to follow that same procedure for this upper edge, going from the upper edge of our boundary surface to the lower edge of our turn signal area. And again, we're going to drag this back because we're not trying to create the entire surface, but rather create a smaller portion that'll help us create the blend between everything. For the upper edge, we're going to use a tangency to face, and the lower edge, we're going to use a curvature to face. Let's go ahead and leave both of the weights at 1 and take a look at the result. You can see we're actually pinching the surface a little bit here, so that's going to produce a poor result based on the curvature. So we want to go back to our extruded surface that helped drive this and reduce the amount of curvature we added. So we'll reduce the amount of curvature in our boundary surface and ultimately reduce the amount of curvature that gets introduced into the new boundary surface we're creating. I'm going to hop back into this boundary surface, drag these handles around, and take a look at the result. All right, the last thing we want to do here is knit all these together. Knitting everything together at this point is going to allow us an easier edge selection when we go to fill these portions in. Hit OK, save our file, and that concludes adding some blending edges.